to introduce our esteemed panel today. So I'll start with Nigel Pound, who is Mercy Corps' Regional Director for the Middle East. He has managed humanitarian programs at Mercy Corps since 1997. From 2009 to 2011, he took sabbatical as a research fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School. He currently focuses on running Mercy Corps' regional response to the Syrian crisis. Our next speaker, Francois Batalingaya, is the Country Director for World Vision International in Somalia. He leads a $50 million cross-border humanitarian operation focusing on emergency health and nutrition, wash, shelter, food security, community resilience, including emergency food aid, as well as child protection and education. Francois' work has over 22 years of experience in international humanitarian and development assistance, including 19 years with World Vision, 2 years with Goal Ireland, and a year with the Belgian section of Doctors Without Borders, MSF. And without much ado, I'd like to then hand over to our first speaker, Nigel.
Thank you, Atish. Could I just confirm that you can hear me okay?
We can hear you well, Nigel.
Okay, thanks. So good day, everyone, wherever you may be in the world. So before I get going, I'd like to just highlight one debate we're having internally at Mercy Corps, something that we're struggling with a little bit, is that we don't actually like the term remote management per se. You know, these programs that we're operating in these highly insecure environments with these complex crises, there are national colleagues and partner staff managing them on the ground all the time. And it's really only the senior management, often international staff, that we're referring to who can't actually get to the project sites. So we internally, we haven't yet figured it out exactly, but we would like to come up with some better language to acknowledge in the way we speak about it, that these programs are being managed by very capable, very brave people on the front lines of these humanitarian operations, and we need to adjust our language accordingly. But that aside, that's the term we've got now, and I'll run with it. So what I'd like to talk you through is our experience from the last couple of years working inside Syria. So Mercy Corps has a regional response to the crisis, working both within Syria and also in the refugee countries. However, our programming inside Syria, we've reached more than 2 million people in the last 2 years with about $195 million worth of assistance across the sectors that you can see listed on this slide. So we have a very substantial operation, and that's the experience of running that is what I'm going to draw on to highlight a few issues. Now, you know, understanding the context it sounds a little bit self-evident and obvious, but bear with me, because you know it's something we should be doing everywhere that we work. However, in this sort of environment that we're talking about, this highly complex, insecure environment where our senior leadership can't get to the project sites, understanding the context becomes paramount, and how information flows within your system, so that the more you understand, you know, that you're making better decisions. So first point is just to really emphasize the need to invest heavily in this, in your analysis capacity. And this is your ability to analyze on multiple fronts. You know, the first is you really need to make sure that your staff in the field are safe, and that you're making decisions that is fully informed by the situation on the ground, and that you're not putting people at unnecessary risk, so the risks are definitely high. The second is that, you know, I think in the Syria crisis in particular, in my experience anyway, assessments have been just super difficult, you know, for the UN out of Damascus, given some of the constraints placed on them by the government and by security, for some of the NGOs working cross-border into Syria, understanding the understanding the, sorry, can I check again that everybody can hear me? I got one comment that the voice is bad.
Audio is great, Nigel.
Yep, we can hear you on our end.
Okay, thanks. So, you know, assessments are super difficult in this situation. So asking people to, you know, really think about how are you going to make sure that your understanding of the humanitarian context on the ground keeps pace, because you can often focus ultimately on running your programs and focusing on the security context, but keeping that understanding of the humanitarian context live is super difficult. Then the fourth point here is, you know, this question of the political economy in which your projects are situated. So again, this is something that we should be doing everywhere that we work. However, in these situations, it's particularly important. And let me just give you a few examples. You know, the first is, you know, if somewhere inside Syria right now, you're providing flour to a bakery, yeah. Now, the importance of the staple of bread, the politics of flour production in Syria, it's incredibly sensitive. So on one hand, there's a massive humanitarian need, and so there's an intrinsic good in that activity. But on the other hand, the politics of providing bread in that environment, who the political actors are, what benefit they might derive from you conducting that there, if you don't fully understand the ins and outs of it, is going to be very sensitive. You know, another example might be if you're going to fix the municipal water supply in one of these towns that's either in the middle of a conflict or on the fringes of it, coming in and out of conflict. Again, there are political conflict actors in those environments who might stand to gain or lose from what you have to do. So let's pay particular attention to that, and getting that information is even more difficult in these situations. And then, you know, in the spirit of learning and to sort of make clear some of the things we're struggling with, you know, integrating these different information streams coming from the field is super challenging. So, you know, you've got information coming in on security, on needs, your M&E data is coming in, but something we're working hard on now, we've got a little way to go to fix, is how do you integrate those to generate a slightly more holistic picture of the situation, so that you're fully informed as you're making some of the high-level decisions, some of the more strategic decisions that the field teams are deferring on. So, you know, program accountability is a big deal in these sort of situations. The first is the pretty obvious stuff. You know, it's standard good practice in humanitarian situations that we need to make sure the right people got the right stuff at the right time, you know, all according to the criteria, and you want to make sure that we get all that right. But then the second piece is that in these types of environments, particularly in Syria, where I'm talking from, you've got this added challenge of designated terrorist organizations who are on all sorts of lists, and you can get into all sorts of trouble if inadvertently you provide material benefit through your programs to these groups. And so it's really important that you have monitoring systems in place in that regard that enable you to know immediately if there's some material benefit, often in the form of diversion, possibly in the form of diversion of your assistance, going to any of these groups or being influenced by any of these groups. And so your systems really need to pick up on that stuff quickly so that you can act on it immediately and so that you can report it accordingly. And that's something to pay real attention to. So there's the two sides. There's sort of the basic humanitarian, who got what according to the plan, and then making sure that you're aware quickly if there's any incidents of diversion and handling that. You know, a few other points then about that sort of the why piece, but then the how. I think it's particularly important in our experience to have multiple sources of data about the same activities and not to rely on any single source. So often in more benign environments, we're working, usually with just a team of monitors who will go and check stuff out, and a combination of, just different field visits. But we're really finding that we need to use a combination of direct hires, third parties, community networks, and social media to try and triangulate and get as many data points as possible to make sure that we've got those different perspectives on any given activity, especially as from a senior management perspective, we can't be on the ground, to make sure that we have a good perspective on what's going on. So with regards to staffing, the staff that you have in these situations on the ground are essentially the primary means by which your identity as an organization is transmitted in that environment. Yeah. So how you are perceived as an organization is largely going to depend on your staff members on the ground. So how a local commander, how a local partner rep, how a local community leader, local government official, et cetera, how they perceive you is largely determined by how they perceive the staff member that you've got. And this is a staff member that you may not have access to very frequently, who may not have had much time to spend within your organization really getting up to speed on who you are and how to communicate. And so there's a couple of things to bear in mind in this regard. The first is that the process of recruiting is tricky because you in Syria, for our work inside Syria, we can't advertise the jobs openly. And so you end up going through a system of trusted referrals, very selected postings for specific positions. And so you need to get your vetting really clear. So who is this person that you're hiring? And there's nothing sort of derogatory in this, but you just really need to understand what's that person's history, where have they come from, what is their activist background, what reputation do they have, et cetera, because that will then rub off on your own organization. And then the second piece to that is once you've got somebody on board that you feel comfortable about hiring, it's super important to get them onboarded and really well trained about who we are as an organization, because that's going to be really key in the midst of this process. The points on training that I've got up here is, I think it's pretty obvious related to what I just said, but there needs to be a lot of training for people really establishing that, take in Syria, for example, there's no history of civil society. NGOs are a new thing. There's lots of different actors, lots of different people on this, in this environment. And so for our staff to really, from whatever their background, really understand who we are, what we do as our business, and to figure out the baseline and then train and mentor the team members against that is really important. And then the second piece is that managing remotely is different and it's difficult. And so oftentimes we hire project managers in whose primary experience has been managing in a direct situation where they're with their teams, able to access the field, and learning the skills and the disciplined behaviors and communication style that's important when they're spending a lot of their life on Skype with field team members is key. So make sure we take the time to have the conversations with the more senior managers who are the ones that are having to work remotely about what's the difference in how you're going to have to manage in order to be successful in this environment, and to work through that with the colleagues. And then finally, there's a lot of questions that we need to discuss. I won't go into it in detail now, but I'm sure people can think for themselves, what's our duty of care towards our staff in these environments? It's often very risky. People are living in high areas of high insecurity where things are happening the whole time. And what is our both responsibility and what is our moral obligation in these situations to our staff? All things that have to be thought through very carefully. Now, with regards to the Syria crisis in particular, Syria has really been a story about access. There have been, I think, 3 Security Council resolutions to date on humanitarian access. The UN out of Damascus is highly constrained, both by security and local politics there. The UN until recently wasn't able to work cross-border until the summer when Security Council Resolution 2165 was passed, giving them permission to work across 4 border crossings. And there's only, I think it's 11 or 12 NGOs now permitted to work, international NGOs permitted to work in Damascus, and a relatively small number of officially registered local organizations in Damascus. So the real thing has been that now in Syria, where you've got an estimated 12 million people in need, of whom a good 9 or 10 million might be displaced, massive crisis. It's been going on for a long time. How do you get access to people who really need assistance? And obviously, a large part of that is, the answer to that is local organizations. Now, there's potential here to sort of go into the transfer of risk conversation. I want to slightly avoid that and talk about it slightly differently, how we think about it in this context at Mercy Corps. And there's a couple of distinctions. The first is that there's a key difference between us as Mercy Corps defining the work and then going out and looking for people who might want to do it, and the risks that people might choose to take in order to be part of that they weren't otherwise taking, compared to being approached by organizations, whatever, however you might define organization, but civil society groups, local partners, who are already doing work in their environments that they lack the resources to scale, to meet, to match their needs. And so our primary approach is to focus on those groups that are already working and have got demonstrated impact, but with limited resources, because they really understand the environment they're working in, they understand that they can manage the risks of that. So what do we do when these folks come to us? What are the really important conversations to have? And, around the risk question, there's a couple of major points to emphasize. The first is, to have a frank conversation with the partner about what is it about our proposed partnership, our relationship, that is going to elevate your risk. You're already taking great risk to deliver in this environment, but what is it that is going to elevate your risk? And are you going to have to go into new geography that you don't have experience of working with? Is your profile going to be raised by the scale at which you're going to operate and put you on the radar of people that you don't want to be on their radar? These sort of questions, to make sure that both ourselves and the partner have a very clear understanding of what the change in their risk profile will be as a result of the partnership. And the second is, if we're comfortable with what the outcome of that first piece, what are the measures in place that they themselves have put in place and that we need to be taking to really help them manage that situation? So once you've figured that side of it out, then the other piece of working with partners is similar to what I was saying about how you select staff. It's really important that you understand who your partners are, who they're comprised of. And in a place like Syria, local partners are very tied up in some ways with organizations that had their roots in activism during the early days of the uprising. And so it's really important, again, to understand the political affiliations and the impartial bona fides of these groups. But then the second piece of the vetting and sort of identity checking process here is making sure that these partners really understand well enough who we are. You know, there are a lot of groups working in Syria with different motivations. You know, a very simple example is you might have a certain contractor or a certain donor looking to build the capacity of the the governance arm of the political opposition in Syria. Yeah. So, and they will also be looking probably for local partners on the ground with whom they can work. Now, that's a very different agenda to our agenda, which is purely humanitarian, focused on impartiality. So it's really important that if these partners are being approached by multiple people and, you know, talking with multiple people, that they understand who we are as much as we understand who they are. And then finally, as I'm sure, you know, you can all imagine the experience yourself, there's no end of finance, legal, and compliance pieces that need to be thought through in this environment when there's a lot of sanctions, there's a lot of you know, terrorist financing regulations, et cetera, that really have to be thought through, and that you need to have robust systems in place to deal with that, especially if dealing with partners. So I think I covered this issue of legal risk previously. So I think I'll leave it at that and just sort of finish by saying, you know, a lot of what I've been describing is ultimately very strong program management, but the risks are so much higher in this sort of environment that it's super important to do the basics really, really well, and that goes a long way to managing risk. So over to Francois.
Thank you, Nigel. I hope you were able to hear me. First of all, I must say that I'm sitting in for a colleague of mine, Kevin McKee, who had a baby on Friday. He had prepared this presentation on what we can do. So I'm going to look at the case study of Somalia. World Vision as an organization has been operating in Somalia continuously for the past 25 years. There have been ups and downs with evacuations and so forth, but the security situation began to deteriorate around 2008. And during that period of time, we started considering a remote management mechanism. Basically, in some of the areas of the staff, we were unable to maintain the presence of international staff members. So we had to pull them out, take them to Nairobi, and leave the program in the care of our capable national staff members. And there are some implications with that. But I can tell you today, in Somalia, we are able to implement a $50 million program through remote management, but also through partners. We have 48 partners, local and international partners, implementing our program in 64 districts throughout Somalia. Now, what are some of the key considerations to look at when considering remote control management? Here, I'll be talking about the duty of care. I will look at the policies and the procedures. I'll look at the roles and responsibilities. I'll look at the monitoring mechanism. Also, I'll be probably repeating some of the things that Nigel has talked about. I'll be talking about the networks, the merit and accountability, and the community perception. Now, when you look at duty of care, obviously, when you talk about remote management, it involves the transfer of risk. And when you look at Somalia, during the past 15 years alone, 147 aid workers have been killed. So that's a statistic. So that will give you roughly an average of 10 aid workers killed per year. That's not really good. And if you add those who have been either wounded or kidnapped, you get to a number of 363 aid workers either killed, wounded, or kidnapped in Somalia during the past 15 years. So it's really risky, and that's why you need to consider clear security measures to mitigate the attacks. Security training is key, and make sure that your staff members are always safe. And again, when we talk about remote control management, it also puts pressure on your staff members. There will be under pressure from armed groups, from the different clans, particularly the major clans, in those areas where you operate. That's why you need to consider deferral mechanism to shield them from pressure. The other thing, when you talk about policies and procedures, remote control management also is a transfer of decision making, because those who are on the ground running the program, they should be able to make decisions. What we have seen in some of the places is that in the early days in 2008, between 2008 and 2010, in some places the decision rights was still at the Nairobi level, which is not the right thing to do. So you need to do some of the trade-offs. How much decentralization, how much centralization. It's important that the key staff members who are on the ground, they're able to make some key decisions. And it was not easy, but it is possible. Experience has shown that it is possible. You need to build trust, you need to build accountability, and you need to build also some capacities to be able to make the right decision. And again, if I go back, when we talk about remote control management, there are those programs that we manage directly, but also there are those programs that are run by our local partners, like Nigel was talking about. When I look at roles and responsibilities, it is important that you get the right people on the ground. Nigel did explain to you what they do in the Middle East. When it comes to staffing, that's more or less the same thing that World Vision does in Somalia. A clear vetting process, making sure that we have the right individuals, we screen them properly, and then we train them, we give them the right skills. That's the second point. Training your staff members to get the right skills, and also mentor them and coach them, even if it's at a distance. So you need to make sure that you establish clear communication mechanisms with your team, whether there is any problems or not. So there is constant communication, and we are up to date on what's going on. For me, at my level, at the leadership level, I want to make sure that I'm not the last one to know. So that's why I also come in to make sure that I understand what's going on the ground. And also, you need to make sure that your team on the ground, they understand clearly what are the expectations, what is expected from them. So that's important, that the roles and responsibilities are clarified and you don't adopt a passive aggressive attitude. Then you need to develop and sustain networks. What does that mean, developing and sustaining some networks on the ground? Probably I would have skipped something, but remote management involves some control, some accountability measures. You need to establish multiple independent monitoring mechanisms, such as third-party monitoring, working with local administration, the peer review monitoring, and so forth and so on. So you could also have a network of let's say, local NGOs, like UN, and so forth and so on. So there is some sort of a feedback mechanism. You get to know what's going on at the field level. And even if possible, you need to establish community feedback mechanisms so that the project is run properly. This is exactly what I was talking about, the monitoring mechanism. So this is clear that we use a lot in Somalia, we use a lot third-party monitoring, we use the peer review mechanism, and we use a lot of community feedback mechanisms. So those are some of the things that you really need to consider to make sure that you know what's going on at the field level. Also, you need to establish a culture of merit and accountability. Based on my experience in West Africa, when there's a lack of future opportunities within the organization, there is a probability short-term thinking. In other words, if a staff member does not see himself or herself in the organization within a year or two, that staff member is going to have a short-term thinking. So it's important that you build the capacity of that individual to see the big picture, not only within the organization, also outside the organization and so forth. So if you really want to make sure that there is a corruption-free environment, you need to give the individual a sense of job security. So that's based on my learning from Liberia some years back. So it's important that staff member, you build the capacity and also some accountability mechanism that you put in place to make sure that the program is run as should be. There has to be some sort of a succession planning. Succession planning, so they know how far can I go? Can I be the next program manager? Can I be the next finance person? And so forth and so on. There has to be a mechanism for moving upwards whenever possible. So in Somalia, we established a culture of discipline with teamwork, excellence in execution, commitment, accountability, and passion. Well, team members who express those behaviors are able to move up the ladder. So that has basically helped us develop a long-term thinking rather than a short-term thinking. Lastly, the community perception. Obviously, when you don't have the presence of international staff members on the ground, some donors and even the community may think that the program is not being run properly. But that should not be the case. Really, yes, the international staff members who provide the unbiased management, who provide which are perceived natural, the principle of humanitarian, the principle of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence should be demonstrated by every single staff member. So you need to make sure that the community perception is considered in the management of the program. So senior leadership's engagement with the community is critical whenever there is an opportunity, and every opportunity should be used to really communicate with everybody. So there has to be the respect of our humanitarian principle. Let me stop there. And most of the things I want to talk about have been touched by Nigel, but I want you to give enough time to ask some questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Francois and Nigel, for this very, very insightful presentations. So we'll move on to questions. Anna, could you hand over presenter rights to me?
Yes, they're coming.
Thanks, Anna. So we also have, as you've also seen on the previous slide, we do have the email addresses of Nigel and Francois as well. So feel free to tweet out or send your questions as well to them. But at this stage, we already have a couple of questions in the chat. So from Julian Srodesky, would it be possible to have some recommendations about practical tools that facilitate remote management, for example, World Vision's MSTC? So I'll direct this to both of you, to Nigel and Francois. So Nigel, do you want to have a go at it first?
Absolutely, it's a good question. From our side at Mercy Corps, we're still in the process of developing a package of tools that we're using at the moment. There's some slight differences between the different programs. So when we compile that on our side, we'll definitely be figuring out how to share that appropriately with the rest of the community. Yeah.
Thanks, Nigel.
Yeah, same with World Vision. You know, remote management so far, we've been using it in Somalia, but also now it's being utilized in NEAR region. But also, I think there will be other countries where we have to consider remote management. I'm thinking of an example of Sudan. So we are at this stage where we have to think of some tools that could help some managers on the site how to do remote management. Making sense of turbulent contexts, that's what Julian Srodecki is referring to. It's a tool that was developed by World Vision. Basically, at the macro level, looking at the country and basically to analyze and predict what might happen in that country in the short term and even the long term. So those are some of the tools which could be helpful. I think Julian, he understands those tools quite well. It's a good example, and there are several other tools. Some of these best practices we are discussing here this afternoon and this morning, well, depending on where you are, that could probably help us in the future develop a good guideline. Thank you.
Thanks both. We have a question here on MNE from Ari Biedo. So he's talking about how methodologies on MNE, and do you have any good lessons learned from the field? Nigel, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I think the key from our side has been to have multiple methods in play at the same time. So I think, you know, ideally, if you're able to hire staff yourself and get them into the field, that's great. But I think, as you know, as Francois said, these staff in the field come under a lot of pressure, and it's a very difficult situation. So it's important to get just multiple perspectives on the same situation. So be that combining, you know, direct monitoring with some third-party monitoring, with possibly some peer reviews or some community-based networks, combining that with some, you know, social media. In Syria, a lot of these partners have a Facebook page even, which they might post what's going on. There's Skype in these communities. And so just making sure that you get multiple perspectives so that you can triangulate.
Thanks, Nigel. Francois, did you want to also have a go at it?
No, that's enough.
Okay, great. We have a question here from Mary Helen. Can you say more about the community feedback mechanisms you use? Who do you consider to be the community, and what feedback do you seek? How does it get to you? How does it get to you?
If I quickly jump in Somalia, most of the community feedback mechanisms have been coming from the community elders. They usually meet and get to our team on the ground in the field with a list of issues and so on and so on, and the key observation. And then usually what we ask them is, how would they resolve the issue? And what they would suggest, what is as an organization, and other NGOs, how could we work together collectively to resolve those issues? So that has been one mechanism. But again, there have been some accusation and accusation and so forth based on the clan rivalry and so forth. So we try to triangulate the information we receive. We want to make sure that we don't fall in a trap when communities are against each other or against the individual because he's not from the same area, the same family, the same background, and so on and so on. So we ourselves, we verify the information and we take it up as soon as possible.
Sure. Nigel, did you also want to, did you have any comments on the community feedback mechanisms?
Well, nothing much to add to Francois. I mean, say that it's super difficult to do, and we've struggled to figure out how to do that independently of our current M&E systems. And so I think, you know, all I can say is that we are getting feedback from communities. It does come through channels other than direct staff hires. But is it as systematic and is it as robust as we'd like it to be? No, and you know, work in progress.
Thanks. We have a question here also by Moguem Elaine. How do you cross-check information given by the team in the field since you don't have access? So it's really a question about with the limited access, how do you sort of cross-check and verify information that you're getting from the operations?
So like I said, having robust and redundant monitoring mechanisms is important. So in other words, cross-checking information is possible, although sometimes it may take a little while. So like I said earlier, you could use a third-party monitor. That's one way. You could use, if there is still a local administration that works, that's another mechanism you could use. You could use a peer NGO or a UN agency. You could, basically, you need to find another mechanism of verifying the information. Even using, well, occasionally we use social media. It's not widely used, but that's another option. So having a third party verifying the information is extremely important and helpful.
Sorry, Atish. I mean, that that's similar to what we were discussing before. It's super important to have multiple perspectives, multiple views on the same situation, so that you can triangulate what they're hearing. And you know what that'll look like by context will vary, but you know all the options that Francois mentioned are definitely part of the puzzle.
Sure. We have a question here on how do you manage the dynamics and the relationships and building trust between local staff who are sort of there for the long haul and expat staff who come in for sort of shorter stints of time. Any tips on how to build up trust and relationships within the operations between the expat and local staff?
Great question.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Nigel.
No, I mean it's a fantastic question. Some very insightful, experienced person asking that one. You know, I think what we're experiencing is that it's just really important to get staff out as much as possible and sort of balancing a lot of the risks are posed when people are on the roads and traveling and, you know, checkpoints and airstrikes and all of that sort of stuff. So you have to balance that risk with the programmatic risk of the field team becoming disconnected from the more senior managers who are based remotely. And so we just look for whatever opportunities we can to get some face time for people together when it's possible. And then these team members, they just spend a lot of time talking on Skype, and we invest heavily in internet connections and just making sure that folks can keep talking. And, you know, unlike this, you know, turn the video on, see the face, see the facial expressions of the people at either end, and build up that relationship over time.
Yeah, I mean, just to add one more point, a brief one. The key here is building the trust between that individual, the staff member, and the field level and the one at the remote site. It's critical. Even if it means really getting to have them to sit together and know each other in for 14 days in a different location, not necessarily the area which is might be extremely insecure. So that's building the trust, getting each other to know, getting them to know each other. It's very critical, and respecting one another. I usually recommend that we even look for some training that could help them to know one another, and so forth and so on. And also clarifying the roles of responsibility, the decision rights. It's critical. Otherwise, when those decision rights are not clear, that's when you start seeing frictions. So that's what I recommend. And that's what I was talking about, having clear roles and responsibilities, and having clear policies and strategic procedures. That's critical.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, could I just build on that last point by Francois? Because I think that's very important, that the things that the little basic things around clarity in management procedures and making sure expectations and priorities and little misunderstandings and all that sort of stuff. When you're in the same office as people, you have much more opportunity to get those things resolved. But when you're working remotely, there's a lot of potential for misunderstandings to grow and just sort of become things in and to themselves. So I think that point of Francois is really important to emphasize, and just getting really clear. And that's a key part of the skill building I was talking about for the senior managers who are sitting remotely, is for them to really focus on making sure that those expectations are super clear, and the decision-making lines are really well defined.
Good point. If we don't have any more questions, I would like to thank both our speakers, Nigel and Francois. Thank you both so much for your excellent presentations and for taking the questions as well. As I mentioned, if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to them. The recording as well of the session will be available shortly, and we are also working together with Mercy Corps and World Vision also to produce a very short online course on remote management and some of the experiences that they can share from the field. Just before we close, just want to remind you we have an upcoming webinar in February with Jerome Berman from Oxfam GB on the Parcel project. For those of you who don't know about the Parcel project, it's related to procurement and selection of local, especially on procurement and selection of local partners and logistics in the field. So do join us in February for this next webinar. And again, thank you very much again to the speakers, to Nigel and Francois, and to all the participants who took the time to join the session. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening. Goodbye.